Now to Ukraine, because President Zelensky has been giving details about his trip to Turkey later this week. We know he'll meet with President Erdogan, but of course the possibility, albeit slim, that he may meet Vladimir Putin if the Russian president takes part in talks to end the war in Ukraine. The Kremlin has refused to say whether Mr. Putin will actually make that journey. Well, let's speak to our correspondent Frank Gardner, who was at the press conference with Ukraine's president. And Frank, what was he saying about his readiness to sit down with Vladimir Putin and the chances of that actually happening?
Well, readiness yet, he said, I simply don't know if President Putin is going to come to the talks in Turkey, or indeed if President Trump, who has hinted that he may attend. He doesn't have the answer to either of those, but he said, look, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to secure peace for Ukraine, but the priority must be a 30-day ceasefire, which all Ukraine's allies, he said, had signed up to. And that, of course, was due to begin yesterday morning. Now, there has been a bit of a let-up in some of the long-range airstrikes, but the fact is that Russia has not yet signed up to that ceasefire. He pointed out that Ukraine had agreed to that comprehensive ceasefire way back in March, on March the 11th, 63 days ago. But he said he's going to fly to Ankara, to the Turkish capital, to meet there with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan before he meets Putin. Now, he said if Putin goes to Istanbul and he's in Ankara, he doesn't want geography to be an excuse for no meeting. He will get on a plane and fly on to Istanbul to meet him there. What he's not prepared to do is to hold talks as president of Ukraine with somebody more junior than President Putin. He said the only person who can stop the fighting is President Putin, Vladimir Putin himself.
I also read that he was saying that if Putin doesn't show, that he is pushing for the strongest set of sanctions yet to be imposed on Russia. We saw that gathering in Kyiv only over the weekend. Is that likely if those events play out in the way I've just said?
I don't think the threat of European sanctions is massively going to hurt the Kremlin. They pretty much shrugged off that joint stance that took place here back on Saturday. What would hurt is if President Trump makes good on his earlier threat that he hinted at, was that if he decides that, as in his words, President Putin is tapping him along, i.e. stringing him along, then he would consider secondary sanctions. That means putting sanctions on those countries like China and India that buy Russia's oil. And it's the money that Russia gets from those sales, admittedly at reduced prices, but nevertheless, that money fuels Russia's war effort. That would hurt. But President Trump, of course, is notoriously quixotic. He seems to change his mind from one week to the next as to which country he's blaming. His most recent outburst on his own social media platform, Truth Social, was full of capital letters and exclamation marks and telling Ukraine it must turn up to the talks in Turkey. Ukraine said, OK, we will. But we still don't know if President Putin is going to be there or not. So I think President Zelensky, and I was only a couple of meters away from him at this press conference, he laid it out what their position was. He clearly doesn't want to be seen as the obstacle for peace. And I think he's played this one fairly cleverly. He's not giving President Putin the option to blame him for failing to turn up.